Chris Sewall here, baseball card collector, investor, dealer in that order. Welcome everyone. Today I want to discuss Beckett, and they're having a tough time here, drastically fallen out of favor in the hobby recently, but particularly over the last few years. And this from a company that, not that long ago was at the very top of the grading world, if not number one, 1A. And if you go back before that, this was, Beckett was the biggest brand name in the sports card world outside the sports manufacturer, the card manufacturers, Topps, Upper Deck, things like that. Beckett was really at the top, and to see them, have fallen so far now is quite alarming. So wanted to go sort of over the history of Beckett a little bit in this video, then discuss, what's happened recently and sort of where they stand today. For those who don't know, Beckett was founded by Dr. James Beckett, who by any account would be on the Mount Rushmore of, all-time important names in the history of the sports card world. Dr. Beckett sold the company in 2005, almost 20 years ago, so hasn't really been involved since then, but he's still very active in the sports card community. He has a podcast, which I've been on. I've met him a few times, and he's still an important, very important voice in the hobby today. Back in 2005, Topps decided to include him in one of their sets, giving him a baseball card in their Topps Archive set. Beckett started grading cards around 1999, but they actually rose to power long before that with their monthly price guides, first with baseball cards and then later in the other sports. Back in the late 80s and throughout the 90s, the Beckett monthly magazine was an absolute critical part of the hobby, as this was before the days of the internet where you could look things up. This was sort of the one way you could get a sense for what your card values were worth. And every month when the price guide was released was a really important day in the hobby. As a kid, I couldn't wait to see which of my cards would have an up arrow next to it every month, meaning the card had gone up in value since the last month. As I mentioned, they expanded into other sports with a monthly magazine for basketball, football, hockey, even racing, and some other sports for a while. Ultimately, the internet sort of took over as the place to get card values, but throughout the 80s and 90s, Beckett was the way to go. Like I said, they first started grading cards around 1999, and at the time they had some very fresh ideas for what was, still a pretty young space, the grading card world, still in its early days, but they brought in subgrades as an idea. They had a 20-point scale with 0.5s instead of the standard 10, and they changed their scale at the top, giving a 9.5 a gem mint instead of a 10, which sort of left room for, the best of the best, which they called Pristine and Black Label Pristine. This was not something other companies had done to that point. For the next 20 plus years, Beckett was one of the big boys in the grading card space. I think basically throughout that entire time, one of the top two companies, maybe even at times you would have called them number one. It was sort of the pandemic, I would say, around 2020, 2021, when things started to drop off a little bit and then really ramped up here recently. When the pandemic hit, the hobby saw a boom like it had never seen before, and especially graded cards. There was more demand for graded cards than ever before, and all the grading companies got massively overwhelmed, but essentially had to shut down. It happened to all of them. PSA, Beckett, and SGC had ridiculous backlogs. Those were the big three at the time. And additionally, a bunch of new startup grading companies popped up, HGA, Tag, Arena Club, and some others. Meanwhile, CJC, which was the biggest comic grading company, decided to get into the sports card grading world as well. So competition in the grading space really ramped up significantly, and it's, in my opinion, Beckett's reaction to this competition that is the reason for their downfall. Companies like SGC really hunkered down and focused on, quick, fast service and really great customer service. PSA has made dozens of little tweaks and adjustments to their brand and business over the last few years. Companies like CGC changed their label twice, did a lot of market surveys to sort of figure out what the label should look like and how they should handle their grading scale. But whereas Beckett has just done nothing. They basically stood still the last 5 years, leaning on their brand name awareness only and not improving their product. At least that's sort of the way I view it, and I'll sort of expand on that in a little bit. Beckett's also had a number of missteps in the last few years. I'll just mention two of the big ones here. In early 2023, they decided they were going to change their grading scale and make 10 gem mint, which had become industry standard at this point. There was such outrage in the community to this proposal that they actually sort of said, hold on, we're going to stop and think about it, and then never did anything or followed up. The label has stayed the same. What's ironic is I think it would have benefited them greatly to actually make the change, even though it would have upset a bunch of people in the moment, but I'll also go back to that in just a second. Another one I'll mention happened just a few weeks ago. The CEO of Beckett's parent company was found guilty or pled guilty to insurance fraud and is going to jail for, I believe, life or a long time. I don't actually know the details of the story, but obviously when the head of your company is going to jail for insurance fraud in a time when the company has been, declining. That's going to raise a lot of questions. Now, Beckett's market share has been declining for quite a while now, but when GemRate put out its numbers for November of this year, just last month, a lot of people, including myself, were pretty overwhelmed by how far Beckett had fallen. Here's the number of cards graded by each of the biggest 4 grading companies in the month of November 2024. PSA 1.26 million cards. Beckett just 34,000 cards. If we look at that by percentage, PSA has about 77% of the market share. Beckett is down to 2%. I mean, we refer to these companies as the big 4. I don't know if you can call 2% a member of the big 4 anymore. That's not a whole lot more than some of the, upstart companies that you hear about, the tags and the arena clubs of the world. If you look at it on a pie chart, here's how it looks. The dark blue is, of course, PSA. That tiny little sliver at the top, that's Beckett, barely even registering on the pie chart. Now, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, but Beckett's scale has become a massive problem for them, and one they should have addressed, a year and a half ago or whenever it was. 9.5 is just not industry standard gem mint anymore. There was a time when it was accepted as a gem mint category, but today, every other grading company uses a 10 for gem mint, and I don't mean like just the big 4. I mean any company you've heard of uses a 10 for gem mint. Beckett's the only one to have a 9.5 as their gem mint. Now, in the past, it sort of served them well because they could reserve 10 for these elite grades. 10 pristine was a really tough grade, and for that reason, Beckett 10s generally always outsold 10s in other companies. And they even have, the black label 10, which is basically a perfect card and something you could, in theory, chase. But over time, these sort of top-notch grades have become, less and less powerful for them. Now, I want to go off on a quick tangent here, partly because this is just something that's always really bugged me, but also because it represents, what one of the problems here for Beckett, and that is the Beckett marketplace. And a lot of you probably don't even know that there is a Beckett marketplace, but yeah, you can go on the Beckett website and there's a marketplace where people can list their cards and other people can buy the cards. And I joined this as a dealer about 10 years ago, and I thought it had a ton of promise. Like, it's basically like an eBay, but strictly for sports cards. So all the searches were, very sports card friendly. It was very, very easy for dealers to bulk list cards, so they could list a lot of cheap dollar cards, and it would be worth their time. So this made it a great shopping experience. You could buy a lot of cheap cards and get combined shipping on, $50 cards and this sort of thing. I just thought it had a lot of promise, and it just never went anywhere. I mean, again, a lot of you probably don't even know that it even exists. They never really marketed it much, and they certainly never improved it. And, I think it's just another example of the company not adapting or evolving with the times. Shortly after I was on there, I learned about COMC, which is a similar concept, not quite the same, but similar. And, I gave COMC a try and quickly learned that I thought that it was just a much superior experience. And today COMC is massive, and I think that was the potential that Beckett Marketplace could have been that if they had put a little more effort into it. But what I really want to complain about the Beckett Marketplace is their pricing. They have a price guide, so it's just like Beckett magazine back in the day, except it's online. You can look up the price of any card, but the prices are just wildly inaccurate, and I don't know where they're getting anything from. And it's very misleading to a lot of collectors, because a lot of people use Beckett Marketplace as sort of a good place to enter your cards into a database, and it can spit out how much your collection's worth and all this, but the pricing is just cuckoo. And as someone who buys collections, a lot of people come to me and say, hey, I have a large collection, and it's all on Beckett Marketplace, and on Beckett Marketplace it shows that there's 20,000 in value, and I have to look at it and be like, I'm sorry, Beckett is just insanely high. And I don't mean like they're 50% high or even double high. I mean, at times they're like 5x, 10x high. I'm going to give a couple examples here. Here's a 2021 Upper Deck Canvas Jamie Drysdale rookie. They claim that this card in raw, near mint condition is a $20 card. Well, you can go on COMC right now and buy the card for $2, $3, dozens of them for $5 or less. Here's another example, 2021 Donruss Unleashed Mike Trout. They claim that this card raw, ungraded, is a $50 card. Well, let's check eBay's recent sales. Here's a couple in the dollar range. There's one for 50 cents. And that crazy high sale for $3. Remember, again, this is a card that Beckett Marketplace lists in their quote-unquote price guide as a $50 card. Very, very misleading to a lot of collectors. But okay, just had to get that off my chest. Back to grading and where Beckett is today. If we go back a few years, let's say 2018, just before, a little before the pandemic, PSA 10s or PSA Gem Mints and Beckett Gem Mints 9.5s sold pretty close. PSA 10s were usually a little higher. Here's a very simple example. 2003 Topps LeBron James. You can see a PSA 10. This sold for $255 back in August of 2018. In that same month, August of 2018, a BGS 9.5 Gem Mint sold for a little less, $225. And you can find examples where the Beckett's higher or much lower, but overall, I would say in general, around this time, PSA 10s were a little bit higher than Beckett 9.5s, but they were fairly close. If we jump forward to today, a PSA 10 copy of the LeBron recently sold for $1,500 plus, and a BGS 9.5 Gem Mint sold for well less than half. These are both in the same exact time period from the same exact seller on eBay. You could see PSA 10s now, in this case at least, more than double the BGS 9.5s, and you can find, this is not a hand-picked example. This is basically how it is across all cards in all the sports for the most part at the moment. But that's it for now regarding Beckett and where they stand today. And let me just say, as someone who's been in the hobby 30 plus years and, grew up with Beckett, I'd love to see them survive and rebound somehow. I don't know what that would look like, but I remember when Fanatics bought Topps a few years ago, my initial thought was like it was kind of sad because there was this thought that Topps was going to go away. There was going to be no more Topps cards. And yeah, I was kind of sad to hear that. And when I think about Beckett, kind of being a nothing company or a throwaway company or maybe not even being around at all, that my initial thought is that's kind of sad. They're part of my childhood, part of my youth, part of the hobby that I love and have made a career out of. But yeah, like I said, I don't know what it would look like for them to rebound, but I hope they find it somehow. But anyway, thank you everyone for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and eat your vegetables. See you again next time. Thanks everyone.